Everybody. All right, before we get started, I need something from the audience. If you are able to, let's rub those hands together like this for me. I want to hear the sound like you haven't used hand lotion in weeks. Now, on the count of 3, we're going to do what I call a thunderclap. And we're going to clap in unison on my count. I need to see those hands. 1, 2, 3. Ooh. Could you feel that? I felt it. Friends, I'm so glad to be here. Let's get this party all the way started. So I have a really long title because we got to talk about something really, really important, building the next generation of web applications. Now, here's the story so far. Now, I gave a talk last year where I was trying to get people ready for what was coming because my spidey senses were tingling and telling me that the way that we do software was going to change. So I told people, AI is going to change the way that we work. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of concern. Will I have a job? Will my work still be meaningful? Will I still be meaningful as things changed? So I gave people a formula. I said, here's what you do. So here's what's funny. AI is all the way here now. It is advancing at a scale and at a speed that even I wasn't predicting. I thought we had maybe 3 years before we got to the point that we are now. But the models are iterating quickly. It's changing quickly. So we have to be ready. But let me tell you what's happening. Even though the models are changing, even though the world is changing, this is not changing. Here's what your users still want. They want powerful applications. That will not change. Their expectations will remain the same. They want powerful applications. And here's what we're finding out, because some people begrudgingly use AI. You know, you get to your laptop like, fine, I'm going to use this thing. I'm going to do a little bit of it. I don't want to be left behind. And guess what you find out if you've done that? It's very good, very helpful, but guess what it doesn't do? It does not solve all the problems. But that isn't a reason to discount it in total. That's just letting you know where we are now. So I want to give you a recipe. If you take notes, this is a good time to take notes. I'm going to give you a recipe to let you know how do you still build the next generation of supercharged web applications. You still need 3 things. You need performance, you need developer experience, and then it's the last ingredient, the AI smarts. That's the new ingredient. It's kind of like, you know, when people started adding avocado to toast, because toast was good with just butter and bread for a long time. And then a few years ago, we just started throwing a fruit on top, like, yeah, this is good. And then what did it do to toast? It took bread from what? You know, a quarter a slice at the deli to $7. Because of that, because it changed, it supercharged the toast, avocado. Somebody's going to tweet that. Mark said avocado supercharged toast. It did, but AI is really supercharging your applications. But we can't get away from the first 2 parts. We can't get away from the performance and the developer experience. So we're going to talk about all 3 of these today together in our time together. Let's keep this party going. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of context. Everything that I'm going to talk about is in the context of a web framework called Angular. But let me tell you something that I know. I've been working as an engineer for over 20 years. And here's what I know. At this point, everything is great. So you can apply these ideas to whatever you use. Okay, if you're a solid person, if you use Svelte, if you use Marco, whatever you use, I don't really care. But the ideas are the same, and I'm just going to tell you how we're thinking about this at Google. What we're thinking about, what we're doing to solve this problem. I need to solve a different problem. My microphone is flying away every time I move my head. All right, here's some feedback that we heard about the developer experience. Now, has anyone either said this or heard it before? You can raise your hand. I will not be offended. My feelings don't matter here. A lot of hands went up. Angular is hard to learn. Yeah, I agree. We agree. Angular team agrees, and here's why. Look at this code. Don't try to decipher this code. But when you wanted to build a Hello World application, you needed a lot of parts. You needed modules, you needed components, you needed Bootstrap, you needed a lot of things. And that felt overwhelming. It didn't feel like a good developer experience. One thing I like about being on this team, because I do choose to be here. I've been at Google for four years, for a little bit more years. So I choose to work on what I work on. I love that we listen and we're trying to solve problems to serve users. This is now how we're figuring this out. This is the same code I just showed you, but now it's much less. Now we can reason about this. You have a component, you got a template, you got a variable that maybe you're interpolating to your template, and guess what? You can bootstrap your app. This is an Angular app. This is an Angular app. The whole thing, right? Somebody's like, but what about the configuration files? Well, what about yours? All right? Now, let's continue with the developer experience, because if your engineers are not happy with whatever you're building, you have to acknowledge that you have to make it better, because that's how they're going to build the next generation applications. This is how you used to do an if statement. Let me walk you through this, because this is hard to decipher even for me. I have to remind myself. So if, using star ng if, the user is human, we're going to display this component. Okay, I see some furrowed eyebrows. People looking like, okay, kind of. And guess what? If it's not a human, it's a robot. Hashtag robot. This is not a movement. We're not trying to be like a Twitter handle. Hashtag robot. It really means to go down here to this extra template that's not being displayed and display this. That's an if else in Angular. Feels bad, I know. Let's keep going. Angular is hard to learn. All right, fine. This is what we did. We fixed it. If it's a human, do what? Display this component. Now we did something a little bit better. Else if. Very clear, very legible, very readful, very mindful, very demure code here. Robot profile. Else, even your default case. Better syntax, making people have a better developer experience, because when you are happy, and you know as engineers, when you are happy with the tools that you use, you build more. Modern reactivity was another part of our story. Let me tell you what Angular was doing for a while. We had this idea called automatic reactivity through this thing called Zone.js. Let me just paint the picture for you. And it was a really good idea, so good. What if you could just update the values of whatever property in your component, and then the tree will get updated. Everything will just get updated automatically. You don't do anything, no set state, no hooks, no nothing. You just update the value, and we handle the rest. That sounds really good, but we found out at scale, it's problematic. It's slow, it breaks, it gives us sharp edges. So we had to make a change. So then we decided to look around in the whole environment and say, well, what is working? What is a better idea? We thought signals were a better idea. Let me give you just a quick overview of how signals work, because you might have heard this, because other frameworks also use signals. The ECMAScript team is thinking about incorporating signals as a part of the API, but what are they? So you got three primitives. You got a signal, a computed, and effect. See, here's what a signal is. Imagine a variable, all right? Imagine a variable that if you update its contents, it can notify anyone who cares about it. It can just make notifications. Anyone in the graph that cares about this variable, so if you're referencing it, it will update it. Fantastic stuff. Now, we're not saying we came up with it, but a good idea is a good idea, and we should always try to move toward the best solution, even if you didn't make it yourself. That's what good engineers do. Here's what a signal looks like in Angular now. We have our variables, first name and last name, and if these values change, anywhere this variable, this property, is referenced will be updated. You don't have to do anything else. Much better. And if you're going to use it in your template, this is what that looks like. Computed is having one of those regular signals where it's just one property. A computed says, well, hey, you can combine properties, and if either one of those change, you can have an updated value. Where could you see something like this? Pretty common. Let's say you can do somebody's like full name, right? First name and surname. If the first name changes or the surname changes, you want that full name to change. So instead of doing all the imperative programming like, well, if there's a change here or if there's a change there, do this, you just update the values. You let the signals communicate as they do. Again, when you go to the template, it's referenced the same way. Better developer experience. And in effect, it's just this idea that maybe I care about what happens after one of these things change. Okay, fine. you have a function that you can call to say, if any of these signals change, a computed changes, a signal changes, run this side effect. And that's what we're doing. And I'm not even writing any imperative code, because you notice it's just a reference to the last name signal, not an if statement. It's reactive. It's reactive. I like that energy. All right, and we're working on a lot more stuff, but let's keep going. We talked about developer experience. Let's get into some performance, because a user will bounce from your site if it is not performant, unless it's a government site in which they cannot get the information anyplace else. That's the very narrow use case, whereas you cannot get the information anyplace else. I must suffer, then I will. But if I have an option, I'm gone. Man, this microphone is literally trying to go. Did anybody see it bounce right off my face when I was talking? This microphone is just like, forget you, bro. All right, so here's what we're working on. So earlier, I saw some really cool demos about with Astro and how they're doing with islands to be able to isolate parts of the page that load differently. We have a similar idea, because I want to be able to load a component only if I interact with the button. And I want to do this, but guess what? When you want to do something like that, usually you're thinking, well, how do I lazy load in a template? What's all the server-side code that I have to invoke? What's all the effort I have to put in? Let me show you what we're thinking about. You got your button. We gave it an ID in there, and I say defer. Defer just means later, just later. Load this when you interact with the button. But how do I know which button I'm talking about? Oh, yeah. You see that right there? That hashtag, that's like a template variable that you can use. And so that's how we're connecting those two things. And so you can defer load that component. But then you have even more control. And this is all in the template level. There's no server-side code required for this. This is all at the template level. You just write this in your HTML template. You want to load? Okay, you have loading code. You got an error? You have your error code. What about the placeholder before you do anything? Fine, put a placeholder. There you go. You can have your placeholder code. We got a bunch of these triggers where you can customize that deferred loading, because what is the goal that we're trying to describe? It's not that Angular is so cool. It's the idea that we're thinking about performance, better developer experience, and then what can you do, right? So what tools that you use offer these ideas where you're thinking about how to best serve your users? We have one Angular user, build.com. They reduced their initial bundle size by 50% by using that strategy I just showed. What about the hydration story? Now, this is really interesting. We started out, anyone been writing code since the early 2000s? It's okay to date yourself just a little bit. You remember this idea that everything was rendered on the server. Everything. You made a request, everything, and then we were like, no, everything on the client. And then we went back and said, wait a minute, there was merit in having some things rendered on the server. So now we have this idea that you have hydration in the server-side story for your client-side applications. The world is really interesting. It's changing. So for our hydration story, if you want to include hydration in your apps, hydration is the idea that we can send your rendered HTML and then send the interactivity after. It's a pretty complicated thing to do in Angular still. We're really working on it. This is the best we can do right now. You add that line to your code. Okay, all done. That's the whole thing. That was supposed to be a joke. If people are like, man, where's the complicated part? No, that was okay, man. I'm going to take a note. Do not tell that one again. Okay, Virgin Media, they use this strategy where they're using hydration and server-side rendering. 72% reduction in their largest contentful paint this way. Lots of value from a performance-focused feature. Now, here's a really interesting idea. So if hydration is this idea that you could send your rendered HTML to the client and then send some parts later, what if you could choose the parts? What if you could be really selective? Well, let me show you what we're going to do on that part. We're doing incremental hydration. Now, I'm looking at this clock, so I know that they're going to start flashing some lights at me, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. But the idea is that what if I wanted to put this part, get this interactivity ready for my users, because this is what my users care about. Justin earlier talked about customer obsession. Think about how they're using your site. What if they care the most about this? Well, then you can incrementally hydrate that while the rest of the page waits. And then what about if they're doing something where it's like, oh, but they're clicking on it, and then, we're going to lose those events while we're hydrating things. Let me tell you what we're doing. We got another framework at Google called Wiz, and we're all partnering together to converge into one super framework. And one of the things that we got from them, because we were thinking like, okay, if I click this view all button before this is hydrated, there might be some problems. Those are going to get lost, right? Because there's no interaction yet. No, it's not. Because we have this thing now called event replay. So we're going to cache those events, and then when this thing is hydrated, those events will play in order with the right data, everything that you need. You want to add event replay? That's how you do it. All right, I really got to go to this part because I know you all are ready for this. Let me tell you about the AI smarts thing. Here's what I think about when I think about AI as a technology person, as a technology leader. I think about what are meaningful integrations of AI and not this misguided direction of the race to replace. Replacing engineers is not the right thing. Replacing talent with AI, in my opinion, is not the right path. Think about meaningful ways to integrate AI into your applications. So things like this. What can you do that is beyond human scale that AI could be really good at? Because AI doesn't have feelings. AI doesn't get bored, right? So what can we do beyond human scale? How can we scan, 1 million MRI images and get more data out of that? That's interesting. Replacing doctors is not interesting to me. You see? That's interesting. That's not interesting. You can simplify some of your code. There are some parts that AI is going to be great at, to just do the simple parts so you can do the fun things. That's what we should be focused on. You do the good stuff. Let AI do the boring things, the templated stuff. Let AI do all of that stuff. You do the cool stuff. Earlier, Gina was on stage and talked about adaptive UIs that could change based on user needs. Having AI being smart enough to figure that out. See, that's interesting. But replacing you as a developer is not interesting. All right, but let's get practical. Let me show you something. So here's an app. I'm going to link the source code so you can try this out. It's a language learning app. Legally distinct from an OWL-based language learning app, okay? But let me show you how this thing works. All right, it's built with Angular. We're using the Gemini API. All right, you want to see it first? Let me just show it to you. I'm going to try. Hold on. We've been going through some stuff today, so I'm not going to promise you. Oh, yeah, see? Oh, that's too bad. Okay, yeah, never mind. I'll show you how it looks. I wanted you to try it, but I'll give you the link so you can try it yourself. Okay, so here's the idea. We had a client-side Angular app. We have a server-side app written in Node that we're using to host our API call. We make some of my arrows are white. Because I'm like, this diagram is not matching the words coming out of my mouth. So my arrows are white, and I forgot to change them to black when I changed the color scheme. So here's the real idea. There's an arrow from client Angular to the server. The server makes an API call to Gemini. So I'm using Gemini the same way you would use a REST API, right, to generate something, okay? Here's the data that I want back in this format. I don't want the extra words. I don't want all the explanation. I want this format. How do we achieve something like this where we can build an app that returns data based on an LLM? Here's what's interesting. You could tell Gemini API, return it as application/JSON as a MIME type. And then you don't have to do any fancy parsing, because I know some of you tried it already. You got to parse out all the text and all the preamble to get the data you want. No, just tell it to return it as data, and it'll do it. Isn't that cool? Here's the prompt. I want you to create 25 vocabulary words for learning a language. I'm going to pass in the language and give it to you. Here's the format so that's the prompt. Here's the format. Tell me the phrase, give me the options. And then I send it back. So a lot of this code looks exactly like the code you write right now. But you know what I gave Gemini to do? The things that I didn't want to do. And it's beyond my scale, because this app can do any language. Any language that Gemini supports, it can give me the translations for any language. That's beyond my scale. But I still wrote the app. I'm still a part of the story. Oh, let's go back for a second. We're rounding the corner. We're going home. Here's what's interesting to me. The recipe for supercharged apps remains the same, it looks like. You still need performance, no matter what tool you're using. You still need performance. You still need good developer experience. And now, the new part, More and more, you're going to need AI smarts. And so as engineers, I encourage you all to learn how to integrate meaningfully into your applications, okay? Meaningfully. Because let me tell you something. Let me tell you what I know that I know that I know. They are working really hard. Companies are working really hard on artificial intelligence. But you are already intelligent. So I want you to get out there and go build great apps. Thank you.